Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the show. The Atheist Experience is live, November the 2nd, 2003. I'm your host, Martin Wagner. Ashley Perrien, my co-host.
Afternoon.
And today our guest on the show is Dr. James D. He's a retired professor of classics from the University of Illinois at Chicago. He was our lecture speaker today, and he'll be talking a little bit about his subject, what he spoke to the group about. And should be very fascinating. We're going to have a great show for you today, and we're very thrilled to have the doctor here. So thank you for coming out to the program. Just the usual battery of announcements, gang. The ACA is a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have weekly meetings every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. at Hot Jumbo Bagels, except for the first Sunday of each month, like today, when we have our lecture series in the Mayor's Room at the Austin History Center, located in the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. And as I said, today's lecturer was Dr. D. And what do we have going on for December? Do we know?
In terms of?
Professor Robert Solomon. Here he is, right here. What I was just talking about in terms of that. Sunday, December 7th will be our next lecture, and Professor Robert Solomon will be speaking to us then, and his topic is still sort of TBA, so we'll let you know as soon as we know. Other regular goings-on with the group. Godless Gamers, of course, meet every Monday night at the home of Russell and Virginia Glasser at 7 o'clock, and ACA Happy Hour takes place Thursday evenings starting around 7:30 at Antonius Tex-Mex near the intersection of Highway 183 and I-35. But people tend to trickle in all evenings, so just if you want to visit that, to turn up, look for the Boisterous Table of Very Loud People, and that'll be us. The Nonprofits is our bi-weekly internet audio show hosted by Jeff D., also Russell Glasser. Sometimes Jeff Jones participates, and that is every other Saturday at 2 in the afternoon at the atheistnetwork.com website. It's an MP3 stream, or you can just go to our website at atheist-community.org, click on the radio show page, and there is a link to the live feed from there as well. And you can also hear about the last half dozen or so episodes. That's about 90 minutes of yelling back and forth and news analysis and current events and from an atheist perspective, and it can be a lot of fun to listen to. And there's an interactive chat room feature that goes along while the show is live, and you can pipe in while you're listening. The University Atheists and Agnostics, registered UT student organization, and now in its third semester. They meet every Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. No, at 4, I believe, in the room Garrison 200. That's it. I got it. Meetings are Fridays at 4 p.m. Garrison 200. And if you are a registered UT student or faculty member, their website is studentorgs.utexas.edu/UAA. For more information about hooking up with that crowd. They've had a lot of success, and good bunch of folks. It's the first real atheists student group that I know of that has really kind of made an impact there at UT. So congrats to them. Let's see. Otherwise, what's just gone on? We've, of course, Halloween weekend. We're more or less all recuperating from. And Russell and Virginia had a terrific party Halloween night, and preceding that, you guys did the trick or canning, did you not?
Yes.
How'd that go
Russell,
over?
Karen, and I, and a couple of Russell's friends, we all went out and did some trick or canning. We don't know exactly how much we collected yet. Food bank isn't open until Monday or during the week, basically, so we'll go and drop it off later. But collected a fair bit of food, hauling back a good armload of canned
Yeah,
canned
you were
goods.
huffing and puffing a whole bunch of, so apparently there was a lot gathered.
We got quite a bit, so.
Oh, good deal. That's terrific. So, all right, well, that's looking like it's going to be a regular thing that we do every year.
Yeah.
So.
And again, just like Aaron was saying last year, it would be nice to get more people to go out and do it. Last year, I know we collected a little over 100 pounds of food. This year, we don't know. But like I say, it was really only, again, Russell and his two friends, they turned back kind of early. Just we were getting to the really populated streets.
Right.
And so me and Karen kind of picked up from there and made the mother load.
All right. Well, good. Good. Well, congrats on that. And I'm sure Austin Food Bank will be happy to get those.
Yep.
So, okay. I think that's just about it for the regular announcements. For more information about Atheist Community of Austin, of course, visit our website. The URL is right there above my head, atheist-community.org, where you can find all kinds of information about us. So thank you for joining us again. Like I said, we got a great show for you today. And we're going to start talking to Dr. D in a second here. Your lecture topic this morning, interesting subject. I'm just going to read the title of the lecture, The Death of the Afterlife, How Fossils, Embryos, and Brains Falsify Promises of Heaven and Threats of Hell. That sounds interesting. And so we'll get right to that after the news. Okay, so what's happening in the world?
Okay, well, we just talked about what we did on Halloween, had a big old bash. Apparently not everybody's quite so lucky. Halloween has been banned from schools in Moscow after Russian education chiefs ruled it was too pagan. Officials caved in to church demands and issued a blanket ban on all Halloween celebrations, from carving pumpkin heads to dressing up. Moscow Education Department has ordered all schools in the capital to ban any Halloween celebrations. In a letter sent to school heads and governor, teachers were warned that the fact that Halloween activities contain elements such as the cult of death, rejecting death, personification of death, and evil spirits produces a destructive effect upon the psychological, moral, and spiritual health of students.
Yeah, dressing up like, a little ghost.
Exactly.
Or
is just leading our society down the path.
Yeah, no, that stuff couldn't possibly be, innocent fun.
Yeah,
it's got to be some horrible indoctrinating thing. Well, it's funny, let's see. Cult of death, rejecting death, personification of death. I hear these phrases and like images of Jesus on the cross just keep coming up to me. It's not like something that's
Jesus
that religion
will rise from the dead.
Yeah, religion hasn't exactly traded in.
You all have spirits of your dead ancestors and everything, your dead family. So talk about personification of death.
Wow.
So
yeah. Boy, they're trying to. They haven't banned it, but they're trying to discourage. They were trying to discourage Halloween celebrations in France this year.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
That does sound familiar.
Yeah.
And
on the grounds that it's American.
Oh.
I mean, I guess we smacked them around, before the Iraq War. And now they're kind of getting some of their own.
Yeah, we had to rename our French fries, so they've got to go without Halloween.
Yeah, but they're saying it's a foolish, banal American tradition, and our kids should do stuff that's European and more indigenous.
Fine.
Interesting. So whatever. But people just read too much into what is just an innocent little holiday.
Yeah.
It's just kids having fun. Let kids be kids.
So, okay, and continuing on with the same thread. This is a Scream House in Pembroke Pines traumatized kids. They expected ghosts, goblins, and Dr. Frankenstein. They got murder, drugs, and Jesus Christ. Diane Biggs of Weston Lords...
I'll teach them to go to a heavy metal concert.
of Coral Springs saw the small homemade sign advertising the Scream House. So they checked out its website and saw it was a typical Halloween haunted house. Biggs took her son, and Hoffman took her daughter. As it turns out, they were 7 and 8 years old. As it turns out, they missed the sign that included the phrase, "It'll scare the hell out of you." Abundant Living Ministries does what it thinks.
That's the sign they should have seen.
Abundant Living Ministries does what it thinks will keep children out of hell, even if it means shocking them and offending their parents with videos of teens overdosing on drugs and women shooting herself in the head after her husband tells her that she's worthless.
Wow.
Speaking of the daughter, she was very upset. There was no warning whatsoever. This was not age appropriate. I wouldn't go see something like this even with a teenager. Hoffman said she took her daughter out before the 20-minute presentation ended. We left at the part where the husband was choking the wife and calling her worthless. As they were leaving, I heard a gun go off.
These people are so deranged to even, last year, a group of us they had this one here in town, the Promised Land Church, did their own little Christian
Virtual
haunted
Hell,
house.
I think it was.
Virtual Hell.
Right.
And it was, at the time I described it as religious pornography.
Yeah.
Because, that's what it does is it tries to appeal to your most base, emotional instincts in order to, terrify you and when you, and what was amazing about it was that what I gathered was, I kept trying to figure out the point of these presentations.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking to myself is, all right, is what they're trying to depict, the idea that if you aren't Christian, this is what your life will be like. Because in that regard, they're wrong. My life's not like that. Remotely,
Most people aren't.
And there was never any real connection that you could make intellectually to, and if you become Christian, you get to be protected from all of this stuff. All this will never happen to you. They never made that connection. So it was just this exercise in let's wallow in the worst that we can possibly imagine and exploit this for our own benefit, to win converts and win members to our church. Yeah. That was ultimately the point. And it was extremely cynical and certainly not in the spirit of, I think, what Halloween is supposed to be for, which is having a good time.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I mean, the people at this church say that they are not at all, regretful. They're not
of course they're
embarrassed
not.
or anything like that. Yeah. This, shocks people. It scares the heck out of them, and it gets them in the churches, and that's the only thing that matters.
Right.
So
in the end, right? Because they're like the Borg, right? They just want to assimilate. That's what religion is. Yeah. It's like its main goal in existing is to perpetuate itself and swell its ranks with more members. And
So even if you offend a couple people here, you're probably you may get more in the end. But yeah, I mean that's just horrible. I mean, again, if you don't have a warning on these type of things, I mean, they were saying that again. They have this video or acting of the husband strangling the wife, saying she's worthless. The wife then shoots herself.
That never happens in Christian families.
Exactly.
No husbands ever beat up or
and while they're doing this, I mean, they take like some water and they splash it on the audience as soon as she's shot to make it seem like oh, there's the blood.
They splash the audience with water?
Yeah.
How lame is that?
And so I mean, it's
I mean, that's lame.
So
well, they have some guy like
horrible. I know with a
pretend you don't see me. I mean, that's just lame.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it, but like I say, I mean, it's just again, this is not at all age appropriate. You should have a warning on that. So,
well, yeah,
but apparently they don't care.
Well,
so.
Yeah, because the people they want to target they want to indoctrinate kids with these
who can't logically think about this stuff and come up with arguments, just scare the hell out of them, and that'll do it.
Well, my report on our trip last year, I think, is still up on our website, on like the past events page, and you can really read what this is all, the craziness this is all about.
Yeah, just referred somebody there a couple days ago.
Ah, right. So. Yeah, some guy like thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun to go out this year to? Not really, because we did that.
Well, I must say it was entertaining. It was fun. It was a good night.
I left there and I just wanted to take a shower and go home and just remind myself what reality was all about.
Yeah.
And, but just grisly. Okay. Got one more?
One more.
Okay.
This is a student group in trying to start up a group in college.
Okay.
They filed an anti-discrimination lawsuit against the university on Friday. I'm not seeing...
Do you know which university?
This is a Minnesota Daily, so I assume it's one up there. I don't see the name offhand immediately. But basically, they're filing anti-discrimination lawsuit against the university, claiming its policies violate the group's First Amendment rights.
Maranatha.
Christian Fellowship, an organization that promotes Christian beliefs, claims a university policy requiring student groups to sign an equal opportunity statement violates constitutional rights. How much of a turnaround is this? Every student group on campus must sign the statement before becoming an official group, which provides access to university funding and other student group amenities. The statement forbids student groups from denying membership based on sexual orientation, religious affiliation, or other discriminatory factors. Now, obviously, they want to start a Christian group, and so they don't want non-Christians.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that they don't have a point.
Like
I mean, I think that religious groups ought to be allowed to have, I mean, by their very nature, they do kind of discriminate. I mean, ACA discriminates in a certain way. I mean, if you...
Yes, but
I guess you don't really have to be an atheist to join the group, but it's just sort of assumed that you would be if you wanted to.
Yeah.
We don't actually go out there and encourage fundamentalist Christians to,
Yeah. Again, it goes back to the whole church-state separation thing. Should a public college be funding a group that can do that, whether it be atheist or?
Well, no, wait a minute. Is the college being asked to fund the group, or is the group just being asked to?
That is why they are an organized group within the college, and the college provides them funding.
Oh.
That's...
Okay, so it's not just like being a student organization.
It's not just a loose pack organization of kids who are doing this.
Because I don't think, like UAA and like registered UT student organizations, the UT doesn't fund you.
Yeah,
you just get to be an organization.
It's just as if UT were funding these groups, and they were getting funding from this group.
Okay, well, I've never known of a place place
So yeah, that's basically
groups,
what's going on here.
So,
and again, that's
well, this is a pretty extreme right wing group, right? I mean, they're like vehemently like anti-Semitic, anti-gay, and they're pretty nasty bunch of people.
But I would expect so. Obviously, to be going to court over this.
I don't know that the university ought to. I think the university ought to make it a policy that any group of students can form a student organization, but I don't think the university should be funding any of them, really.
Yeah. Well, that's what's going on with this college.
Yeah.
Is again, they have access to funding and amenities, so the college would be sponsoring them in some way.
Yeah. See, I don't think the college should be in the business of doing that. I mean, for student organizations, I think that should be up to the organization.
Up to the students, yeah.
Yeah. So. Because that leaves it more free for the student organizations to kind of do what they want, right?
Yeah.
And
not have
theoretically you should be allowed to do. Yeah. So I don't know that. Yeah.
So yeah, they're going to court over this because they want to be a fully sponsored group within the college, and the college is saying that you have to be able to allow people in who are gay and non-Christian, stuff like that, and they're
if they want to get the
issues
funding
with this.
Well, I think that the easy way to avoid this problem at all is just for the university to get rid of its policy of funding these groups.
Exactly. Either officially support, but recognize these
groups. Let students register groups, but don't provide them with funds.
Exactly.
That seems to work for other colleges.
That would be the easiest thing to do.
Okay.
So maybe that's what they will do. So.
Wow.
But that is basically it for the news.
Okay. I have one quick piece that just found the other day before we get to the doctor. We admittedly aren't big fans of Catholic priests here on the show, right?
I don't know about that.
We've been very harshly critical of them from one thing or another over the last year or so.
With good reason, I have to say.
But we like Catholic schoolgirls just fine. And we especially like them when a gang of 20 of them chases a flasher for like 3 blocks.
Oh, yeah.
And kicks the crap out of him. Did you see this?
Yep.
On the news like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
This is in Philadelphia. There's this persistent flasher hanging around this girls' school in Philly and, exposing himself and running off. And finally, they just decided, the hell with this.
A couple of the girls recognized him.
Yeah.
It was when he walked up to the school again.
And it was like, a scene from some, Benny Hill thing. The guy's running down the block and this mob of girls is chasing him and they catch him.
Yeah.
And they just wail away on him for like 10 minutes until the cops show up and haul him off to the hospital.
Yeah.
And I kind of have to think, high five on that. That's
exactly.
So cool.
And these kids, they're early teenagers, 14, 15, that type of thing. So, but yeah, big thumbs up.
So kind of a way to get your own back. And I can certainly understand the sentiment there, right? This would be offensive enough, right?
Yeah.
But with the Catholic Church being rocked by all of these scandals in the last few years.
Yeah.
And especially, the laity has really been shaken up by this, especially the whole idea that, the worst sexual predators apparently are the priests that you've been taught to trust.
Yeah.
So, the whole idea of, perverts hanging around is a tremendously sensitive, touchy topic. And I guess, so this guy picked the wrong group of girls to flash, I suppose, and they decided to kind of take out their long-standing frustrations.
Yeah.
So great. And it was kind of interesting. The only person who has come out and basically said that the girls shouldn't have done what they did to this guy is the priest at their school.
No way.
Yeah, he says, "Oh, they went too far. They shouldn't, they shouldn't have done." Yeah, it's sort of like even the arresting officers who showed up while they were like, just kind of stood there and they're like,
I know.
The cops were like, "Way to go!" Even the police were saying this, and the only person. Now this is kind of telling, right? And why
protecting yourself, perhaps?
Yeah, a Catholic priest being the one person to object to a sexual predator getting beat up. Does this make sense suddenly? So anyway, I just thought that was a really funny story. And see, when religious people do cool things, we praise them. So, but that was just really funny.
Yeah.
All right. If you've never tuned into the show before, it's a live call-in show, and our guest today is Dr. James D. Thrilled to have you. Thank you for coming on, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I guess I know that you have a history of you've had some guest editorials published in our local paper, and so you've been you've been an outspoken advocate here locally for the non-religious view, and you had a very interesting lecture topic today. So why not just take the stage and fill us in?
All right. Spent my career as an ordinary academic, living below the radar, you might say, at the University of Illinois at Chicago, which I had to stress in the talk today is not to be confused with the University of Chicago, and not to be confused with that Illinois Cornfields Institution, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And when I reached the pastures of early retirement just a few years ago, and was put in touch with one of the assistant editors down at the paper through Tom Palaima, who's one of their regular contributors and someone I'd known for years, I found that they were willing to take some of these pieces, which I thought a local newspaper, a family newspaper as it describes itself, would perhaps never take, because as you know, they don't have any established place in the paper where unorthodox views are represented.
And the statesmen are highly conservative.
It tends to be, although both the assistant editors that I've been dealing with have actually been pretty willing to consider these pieces. Some of them I've submitted they didn't want to deal with. One was called The Trouble with Christmas. I discovered only later that Tom Flynn at Free Inquiry actually has a book with that title. And I've seen the table of contents. I don't think there's any overlap between what he was going to say and what I was going to say in 700 words. But they thought it was, at the time, several years ago, too explosive. But in June of '01, they did take the column that was mentioned earlier today, which had the title, Good God is a Virtual Contradiction in Terms, with good God in quotation marks. And it raised issues that had been brought up by Marvin Olasky saying God is always good. And this is an old philosophical chestnut, that you can't explain the evil in the world if God is perfectly good and omnipotent. And I cited in the column, for anyone who read it, a bumper sticker which I had picked up in Dragon's Lair, the games and fantasy store over on Burnett Road. They have all those bumper stickers. And they had a very nice one with a word that even caught my eye that said omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, pick two. Which encapsulates in 5 words what John Mackey, in a very famous article in Mind for 1955, said in about 14 pages called Evil and Omnipotence, which was the point I tried to use in the article. So from that point forward, I've just had, as some of your audience may have seen on Halloween, October 31st, that 9th column was printed on racial issues. But I've had 3 that touched on religious issues, always from a secularist or an atheist perspective, and they've been willing to take them. So I'm actually quite pleased to be able to have these things, and then to receive the invitation from the atheist community to deliver a much longer talk. I've read in my lecture today, I read about 10 pages of the manuscript was material that's going to be appearing in Free Inquiry in February, March. As an issue as an article with the title, The Silver Bullet Question That Kills the Immortal Soul. And that's the fossils, embryos, and brains phrase in the title. And what I did in the lecture today, after some preliminaries about my own background and general problems that can be raised with the idea of a soul, I had the New Yorker cartoon in which a 96-year-old is saying, it never occurred to me that if I lived to be 96, I'd look 96 for all eternity. It's one of the drawbacks of living a long life, apparently. But I had said in the paper, I went through 3 areas of concern where people generally think there is an afterlife and we're all going to get there, but they don't ask themselves, in the fossils part, now who, if they accept the evolutionary view that human life has a very long time span and is a continuum of development, which is a point the Pope himself has accepted in the 1996 address, who is the first person to have a soul? That's my silver bullet question. The question involving embryos, or the issue involving embryos, comes from the fact that research in the last 20 or 30 years has shown that a very high percentage of fertilized eggs are discarded by nature. They are deformed. Upwards of 50 to 75% of human fertilized eggs do not make it and become babies.
They're never even attached to the uterine wall.
They're never attached. Some of them are attached, but they slough off because they're so profoundly deformed. This is something that's only beginning to hit public consciousness. And it means if they had souls from the moment of conception, although there is no moment of conception, that means 50 to 75% of all souls are going nowhere for all eternity.
Right.
They're not going to make 95, they're not going to make 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then the brains part had to do with research in neurophysiology of consciousness, again in the last 30 or 40 years, where some of the most amazing results have been achieved by people who are not household names like Francis Crick and James Watson, showing that consciousness, which is what we think we are, I am me, I'm in here, I'm seeing the world, I'm the same person every morning when I get up, consciousness turns out to be a construct of the 100 billion neurons in your brain with all their complex interconnections, and consciousness is just what's thrown up on the screen. I waved one of the books at the group called The User Illusion and told them if you read one popular science book a year, this is it. It was by a Danish science writer named Tor Norretrandes. It's published by Penguin, translated in 98, but published in Danish in 91. And he'd been right near the cutting edge of research. In America and England and Germany, he cites all the technical journal articles on consciousness research that were available to him. He interviewed Francis Crick, he interviewed Benjamin Libet, he interviewed all the leading figures in the field, and came up with the material they've published in the arcane technical journals and has tried to make it available to the people at large and the reading public, discovering that consciousness really is what he calls the user illusion. The user illusion in a computer is the impression you get from the screen that there's something underneath there that you can address and talk to and that's responding to you. But in fact, it's just electrons zipping around in pathways. And the user illusion of consciousness is the sense we have that we are something, but in fact that's something, as in the case when they cut the corpus callosum of your brain and you have 2 brains, and you have Jim Brady, Reagan's presidential aide, who was shot and is now profoundly disturbed and mentally handicapped, you might say, because of what happened to his brain. His personality is different, his essence is different. This has very devastating implications, as far as I was concerned, for the notion that there is a single soul in each one of us that is our consciousness, even if it started the size of a tenth of a millimeter and grew as we grew. So that there are 3 areas in which the old, comfortable, easy conceptions of the soul don't work and don't mesh with science. And what I call phylogeny, the history of the species, who was the first, in ontogeny, the development of individuals, where did you get your soul on the timeline from fertilization to birth, if you got it at all. And then there is this question of consciousness. Are you really there? Or will you, as the old Roman poet Lucretius would have said 2,000 years ago, when you die, your atoms and molecules will simply rearrange themselves. You will cease to exist. It's interesting that modern biologists, I think, basically take that same position.
Yeah.
So that was the essence of the talk, minus all the jokes. And if anyone wants to discuss the issues, I'm perfectly willing. We had some good talk afterwards, and I'm hoping there'll be more follow-up.
Yeah. One thing I found puzzling about the whole notion of the soul is that you can never get a clear answer on exactly where it is in you, and when you get right down to it, and you listen to believers try to noodle it out and explain it to you, that this is all part of just the wish fulfillment aspect of religion, which is that one big concern that I think the number one concern that any sort of self-aware organism has is its own mortality. Even dumb animals have a survival instinct, but I think that human beings, especially because we're intelligent, we're conscious of our own mortality. We're aware that we're going to, die at some point eventually. And that weighs on a lot of people. And so religion has come and very conveniently addressed that big concern, saying, okay, well, when you die, you really don't. And because that is such a big relief and weight off of people's shoulders to hear that, I think they don't really find it necessary at that point to sort of pin down all of the specific technical or scientific or biological aspects of the soul, because it's not necessary, because what the soul was, the concept of the soul was created for, to assuage that fear, has been addressed. And so beyond that, there's really no further exploration of the concept. And believers really kind of get annoyed when you ask them these kinds of questions, like, where, at what point during your embryonic development is this injected into you? Where does it reside? How does it know to go where it goes when you die, supposedly? They seem to think that you're missing the point by asking all of these sciencey questions. Yeah, And in a sense, they might have a point, because to ask those kinds of questions probably is missing the point, because really, all that the concept of the soul is about, I think, is to address this number one fear that human beings have, which is, I don't really want to die. I want to know that I'm going to go to a wonderful place, or that my life will continue when I, leave this body. So that seems to me to be really what souls are there about.
Right. Well, people want to survive death. I gave some examples in the paper about the power of the urge to go on living and the desire people have that their loved ones, as they're politely called, would continue to exist. And I mentioned the industry of John Edward and other people who claim to be able to communicate with the dead, although they never get them to say anything very interesting. Never get in touch with really important people, and they are unable to explain. But you have the printout, I have a printout of this Barna Group survey that was just issued, indicating that 81% of the American public seems to believe that they will survive death. So it's very clear that this is a desire people have that's very widespread, and that science has made very little inroads. I was actually encouraged, I said so in the talk, that 10% apparently of the people they polled, and it's supposed to be a fairly representative cross-section, say they do not believe in an afterlife at all. And I have no idea what percentage of people across human history down through antiquity and so on have disbelieved in an afterlife, but it has very old roots. And people have believed this in one form or another without being able to spell out exactly what it is people are going to do in their afterlife. I've always thought that it would mean at least that library books would be permanently available to me forever. And I would have no problems. If you're Mozart, it means your orchestra is always there available, and their instruments are never out of tune. Like the lutenist who's tuning his instrument for 80 years out of his life. He lives to be 100. So this is the sort of thing where, as you say, the wish fulfillment element enters in, and it has this very long run. But I think now people really have to face the difficulties. Stephen Weinberg has issued very recently a volume of his papers and essays called Facing Up. And when he read from this at the Texas Book Writers Festival 2 years ago, I went. It was on the state capitol grounds because I was very intrigued by his title, Facing Up. I was wondering what he meant by it. I hadn't seen the book, although they were selling it there. And he began by saying that there were 3 allusions in the title. One was to the simple expression, facing up, we have to face up to our problems. Another was that we have to look upward at the sky, since he's a cosmologist, physicist, astronomer. We can find answers to the large-scale cosmic nature of reality by looking up. And then the third reference was to a statue of Tycho Brahe on an island where he had set up this enormous observatory in his lifetime to measure the movement of planets. And it shows Tycho Brahe looking up, and it's the frontispiece of the book. Is Brahe facing up? So I asked him, I thought one of the 3 allusions would certainly be a famous line in what turns out to be one of his most favorite authors, Lucretius, the Roman poet. Because he has a Latin expression. I won't try quoting it for you because I never get the word order right in the meter. But it has to do with saying that Epicurus, Lucretius's materialist hero, was the first person, primus in Latin, to teach mortals to lift their eyes up, mortalis tollere contra, to lift their eyes up against the celestial gods and dethrone them. And I said, I thought that would surely be an allusion. He said, oh my God, you're right, it should be there. Because it's one of my favorite authors. But the facing up to it is something that people now have to deal with, and that's part of the allusion in his title. We didn't have this information, a lot of it, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. You could argue about the soul, and it was an airy sort of thing. You could argue about near-death experiences. You didn't have to worry about evolution. You didn't have to worry about embryology. You could just take the old traditional images and run with them. But now there is something very different on the playing field, and people... As I said in the paper, I thought the reaction of the interreligious ministries when I issued my invitation to them to have a dialogue on the subject would be silence or evasion. And I've gotten silence from them and evasion from the letter writers who wrote in, who denied science rather than deal with the specifics. When did this start to happen?
Again, you're missing the point. That's not what it's about. We're going to encourage our callers to hang on. We'll get to you shortly, but we want to give the doctor enough time to give his presentation. So I was in an email exchange not long ago, again, with some woman who, again, thought she was psychic and talked to the dead and everything. And I said, look, there's a very simple way for you to prove these claims. It's like, if you really talk to dead people, why don't you get in touch with Alexander the Great? You know, get him to tell us where his tomb is. Okay, he tells you. We go there, we dig it up, we find it. Your powers are proved. The existence of an afterlife is proved. You get a Nobel Prize and become the most famous person on Earth. And she was like, well, it doesn't work that way. And so like, anytime you come up with a workable test for these kinds of claims, for these beliefs, of course, it never works that way. And so again, I think that's really what it is all for, is, again, it's just to assuage what is essentially very personal, just emotional, atavistic need people have. It's like, uh-oh, I'm going to die someday and I'm not too happy about that. Okay. And so I want that to be addressed. And that's why when you all that these talk to the dead purveyors seem to be able to do when they talk to the dead is get the most banal, well, he wants you to be happy and that sort of thing. It's like, oh, well, that's it. I mean, nothing about.
I said the same thing in the talk, as you remember. It said have them get in touch with Mozart and finish the Requiem or the C minor Mass. I'd like both of those finished. Yeah. Beethoven, 10th Symphony, or Bach, the Art of Fugue. But they're never able to do this sort of thing. It's very much like the famous episode involving Houdini, who spent a lot of his career exposing psychics and frauds and charlatans. Right. And he ran into this woman in Boston named Marjorie. His stage name was Marjorie. Yeah. And he wrote that up at great length. But she, like the spirit rappers of the 19th century, insisted that she could do these things, make objects move and bells ring and so on, but she had to have total darkness. It doesn't work. It's like contacting the dead. It doesn't work that way unless there's, that's right. So if you turn on the lights
and saw the strings dangling, the things moving, then that would kind of blow the act.
And if you've ever read Houdini's account, it's just hilarious as to how she would be roped down, of course, with big knots all around her legs and feet, but of course she'd wheel out anyway. Yeah. And he would catch her hand running across trying to do something, which is an old skill they developed in the 19th century. Yeah. But you would think, if people are trying to be serious about this, they would say a scientific process can take place in daylight. Yeah. But of course, hers couldn't. She had to do it in the dark. And yet people, I think from Scientific American in its 20s incarnation, showed up at these events and offered scientific expertise and objective observation, and they were willing to accept these conditions, which are just hilarious. I mean, how anybody could do this. Yeah. But it's the same problem. We don't want to explore, we don't want to do this or that. We want to say, it's fine, they're happy, they're out there, they're,
we're in our comfort zone, and that's all we need.
That's right. And it's just important to be careful also that with things like that. Again, I mean, you can make many of the same kind of arguments with science. I mean, the first person who saw lightning says, my God, this huge bolt came down from the sky and it burnt this tree. Well, fine then, here's a steak, cook it. You can't make it happen. It doesn't work like that. And so,
So maybe souls are like a force of nature, like lightning, that we can't really control. And
who's to say?
Yeah. But we understand.
Obviously, I'm not taking that point of view.
But we
know me well enough.
Yeah, but we understand what lightning is, though, and there is a difference. I mean, lightning is a tangible physical thing.
Exactly. And we can now look at it. We can study it. We have an idea of how it works, and it has actual. You can observe the effects of it, even when it doesn't happen. You can still see that there's large negative charges in the clouds or positive charges in the ground. And maybe what will happen is they'll meet and stuff like that.
Could be. But a letter writer in the current Skeptical Inquirer, I think, came up with just a perfect test for anyone who thinks that they're in contact with dead people. He says, I have a list of 10 questions in an envelope, and my dead grandfather would know the answers to all 10. So if you can answer all 10 of them correctly, I'll believe your claim. Getting most of them is not good enough, because my grandfather would know the answers to all, and either you are in touch with him or you aren't. Okay, I mean, there's no middle ground. Getting 4 or 5 right doesn't count by guesswork. And so it seems to me that it's very simply you can debunk these claims, but because people have this emotional need that they want fulfilled so badly, this is where folks will just put up a blind spot, where it's just, if I want to believe this and it makes me happy and it's my security blanket, then don't upset that, please. That's really what that's all for. What do you think about the origins? And we're going to get to callers here in just a couple minutes. The origins of belief in the afterlife, like historically, and where do we see the first traces of it? I read an interesting book by L. Sprague de Camp, where he suggested that the first believers in an afterlife probably were primitive humans, hominids, having dreams about other people whom they knew to be dead. And which happens. I mean, if you've lost a loved one, shortly after the death, you dream about them frequently, and you talk to them for, it's just they enter your dreams. and this happens for a little while after their death, and so you can imagine how an unsophisticated person would make this connection. Oh, they've come back they must be somewhere.
Right. Yeah. I mentioned that briefly in the paper because there was a conference that the CFI, the Center for Inquiry, held in Atlanta in November 2001, and they just published in March a book based loosely on the conference proceedings. They had a session that was entitled "Do Souls Exist?" And they had two speakers, both against the subject, a philosopher, William K. Spear, and a retired physicist named Jerome Elbert, who has also published a book called Are Souls Real? That Prometheus Books published. And in the course, this forms a long chunk in my article and also in the paper today, in the course of the Q&A afterwards, a fellow got up and asked the question that I wanted to raise and wasn't there to raise: when in the evolutionary time span did people first have a soul? Well, there was discussion and it went off in another direction, and finally a woman got up and answered your question, saying that you have the concept of the soul in hominids or in humans with Neanderthals as we say in German, because some of the grave goods that are found in burials of Neanderthals, this would be 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, seem to imply possession of those objects or their spirit equivalents, as in Egyptian pharaoh burials. And that would imply a belief in the afterlife. And she said, so there's your answer. And the audience laughed, although it wasn't an answer to the question that the original question had posed at all. He said, where on the timeline would it actually happen? Not when did people think it would happen.
Right. When did the belief start?
And I'm not an anthropologist. I can't comment on whether or not there are really good inferences to be made from fossil evidence, burial goods evidence, other kinds of evidence.
Right, because I've read some people who have postulated that, what some folks seem to think are grave goods in Neanderthal burial sites aren't really that. It's probably just crap lying around. Because, you wouldn't, if you were a primitive hunter-gatherer, there's stuff that just kind of happened to get buried. You're not going to leave a perfectly good knife behind that you can hunt with when you're
well, but you do have ceremonial burials later on, of course, all over the world.
I mean, eventually this did as civilization grew, but in pre-civilization times, when, again, we're just hunter-gatherer clans trying to catch your dinner, they probably would not have, given it what few resources they had, would have been so precious they would not have.
And part of the problem, of course, in all of this stuff is that we're talking about physical objects that have survived in the ground that are not accompanied by any written text. Because, of course, writing would give you a clue if you could translate the writing, if it's Sumerian, if it's Egyptian, if it's Babylonian, Akkadian, whatever the language is. If you can crack the code of that language, you can probably find out what they think. But, of course, that's one of the chief problems of early prehistory, is that there isn't any writing until you get to the ancient Near East.
Yes, it's all speculative, really.
Texas has Denise Schmant-Besserath, who's one of the great experts on the origins of writing in sort of palace record-keeping, clay seals and so on. But none of this takes you past 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, and we're talking Neanderthals 30, 40, 50,000 years ago. So people didn't have any way of recording their beliefs in a permanent form. We know from people like Julius Caesar that the Celts, the Druids, in Gaul, memorized vast quantities of information about their belief system, their religious system, the reincarnation beliefs, and so on. But none of this ever got written down at any point in their history, so when the Celts absorbed into other European populations, all that information disappeared. So when people first started believing Uncle Joe is still alive, is somewhere out there, is very hard to pinpoint. But the simple fact is, on almost any assumption, you can take back the 5,000 years to the beginning of writing, when we know why they gave all these things to dead pharaohs. They were in an afterlife. Their soul was there, existing for all eternity. And then you raise the question I raised today, is that Iceman that was found in 1991, the corpse in the ice 10,000-foot altitude along the Italian-Austrian border, did he have a soul too? As when you look at the drawings of his clothing and so on, it's not at all clear if he was literate. They probably didn't have any writing. That's an illiterate society. And it's probable that he was involved in some kind of atrocities, wars and battles. He had wounds and everything else. So he doesn't look like someone you'd want as an ancestor. And so the concept is a very difficult one to spread across the planet. Because you can't be serious that souls only came along 5,000 years ago. On the other hand, you also can't be serious that they came along 60,000 years ago. And that was one of my principal points, that there's no point morally on the timeline where you can put this.
I think that you'll find, people who probably take belief in the soul most seriously, of course, are the same kinds of people who do not accept that evolutionary timeline for humanity. They think in terms of Adam and Eve, and God, breathed life into the person, and that's
Don't really think so.
No.
I would expect that.
Most Protestant and now the Pope, I quoted at length in this papal address. This is the famous address, October 22nd, 1996, and I called Ed Shirley down at St. Edward's University, who's professor of theology, to ask if I would be able to find anywhere in Catholic scholarship on the soul and evolution, since they do claim to accept evolution, any more precise indication beyond what the Pope says, that there is an ontological leap when the soul is created and infused at the appropriate moment in primate development. And he said, no, you won't find any more precise statement. So it's not a question of them not dealing with it. You know. When the questioner in the audience at that conference asked the question, Elbert on the podium said, the other religionists would probably say Adam, but of course most serious religions, Protestant and Catholic, don't say this any longer. They're willing to say, no, we do accept old earth evolution, but they haven't been pressed to say, now when do you think a man had a soul and his father didn't for the first time?
Yeah.
Because that's the silver bullet question.
Interesting. Wow, that's fun. Well, who knows? Maybe some of our callers can fill us in on that. But yeah, that's intriguing. When did it? Again, I suppose it's one of those areas where they willfully put up that blind spot because again, the belief in the soul, satisfies the emotional need, to assuage the fear of death, and maybe it's just a thing that a lot of them might just not want to think about it.
If I could throw in one quick example from my own background in classics. We all say we understand that we are going to die. It's self-knowledge, and we don't know if animals have it, but we certainly do. Maybe elephants do at the end. But there's an old Greek myth that Prometheus conferred a great benefit upon mankind. He gave us fire, and he gave us lots of other things in the famous pseudo-Aeschylean tragedy. But there's also a legend that one of the benefits he conferred upon mankind was to make them not know the day on which they would die, which was something in the older generation they were born knowing. It's a very awful thing to know when you think about it. So Prometheus is always portrayed as the liberator of mankind, the freer of mankind as a mythical figure. And liberation from knowing, you still have to worry about it and think about it and obsess about it and try to avoid it. Yeah. But not knowing when you're going to die is a very great boon. And we don't know.
Yeah.
We may be programmed for lots of things, maybe programmed to die as a biological entity, but we don't know when the little subroutines will kick in that will send us down to nothingness. And
so that's why you live the best life you can while you're here. So anyway, well, we are now going to get to calls, and we appreciate the callers who've been holding. And if we had some folks earlier who sort of like gave up, and but don't worry, we're willing to talk to you now if you want to call back. 477-2288 is that number to call us live. And hi, Kevin, you're on the air. Thanks for holding.
Last week I called in. I didn't have a chance to finish what I was. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'll fix that.
All right. Might have thought okay. You there?
Are you there? Yeah. I just had to fix the feedback.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Last week I raised the question of the zero-dimensional quantum fluctuation as the start of the universe.
Oh, right. Okay.
What I pose is that time is a constant.
Okay.
For all of eternity. Okay? And at the constant time equals zero, all that exists is a zero-dimensional quantum dot.
Okay.
And as time progresses, there is an infinite number of quantum dots that spreads out through the universe.
Okay.
And it is string theory that binds together these quantum dots. So, the universe would then be a natural living organism, a natural neural network, so to speak, that is self-evident.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not our field of expertise, and I wish I could chime in and sound brilliant.
The thing is, the definition that God is omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient was given to us by Descartes, who was a professed atheist. He doubted everything, and that is the only way that he came up with that definition.
What is the only way he came up with the definition?
The definition of God as omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient.
Yeah. But you said that's the only way he came up with it.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed the connection.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what's the only way he...
That's an atheist definition of God.
Well, that's what a lot of Christian callers call up and tell us too.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
so
I don't know
So
that.
they happen to like that idea.
My
maybe.
definition of God.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that. Well, I mean, I want to get some confirmation that Descartes was the first person to come up with that definition of God. I mean, he could well have been, again, repeating what he had heard. As I understand it, I mean, that is a definition of God that most Christians are okay with, and they profess themselves.
Yes,
So,
but when logic and reason are applied to it, you end up with the problem of evil.
Yeah.
sure.
Um,
Well, I would just want to make sure. I want to get some confirmation that no one before Descartes was floating that idea of God, because I do think that it is.
I'm pretty sure that he was the one that tried to persist that definition of God.
Okay, because I mean, because I know that, I mean, I would think that Aquinas probably had something to say along those lines. So I'd want to go back and confirm some of that. But wherever that particular definition of God first originated, I mean, it is as an atheist myself, I can only respond to the definitions of gods that I get from believers.
Okay.
And so. Yeah, if someone provides me with a definition of the God that they believe in that is different from that particular definition or the most common definition, I will judge it based on its merits, just like any other definition I would get, and see if the claim holds up on those grounds. So,
Okay.
I can imagine concepts of God that I'd be perfectly willing to believe in.
Well,
If I were to meet a guy who was a sun worshiper, I'm willing to admit the sun exists if he wants to worship the sun and call that his God.
Okay.
So you're right. Not everyone has the same definition of God, but as atheists, we can only be critical of the definitions that we get from believers.
Let me give you the context then.
Okay.
If you take the limit of t as it goes to 0 from the negative, it is an infinitely dimensional hypersphere
Okay.
with God's singular consciousness at the center. So,
Well, I think that's a little speculative, but
Yeah.
yes, it is slightly speculative.
well, it's very speculative.
But bear with me.
Okay.
God then would be not omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient, but rather eternally benevolent, as in always good, but not perfectly good.
Okay.
He would be omniscient, as in perfect in knowledge,
Yeah.
and omniprecise,
Okay.
as in knowing exactly what to do.
Okay. So it sounds to me like you are looking at quantum mechanics and string theory as a way to get to what you would consider to be a more workable definition of God, as it were.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
Okay. My only issue, I guess, with that is if quantum mechanics equals God, then why do we need God? We have quantum mechanics is a perfectly good workable term.
Because
God applies
is
a lot of baggage to things that don't really
omniprecise.
need to be there.
Okay.
But what does relabeling it as God do for it? How does that help anything?
Because if there is no God, then there is no existence.
well, how do you get?
Okay,
how do you
fine,
how do
then
you
my
make
coffee cup is God.
Well, how do you make that leap, though? I mean,
Because
okay.
there has to be a leap
How does
from
how does
zero-dimensional quantum fluctuation
yeah? But see,
to
what you're doing.
existence as we know it.
Right, but what you're doing, okay, is what you've basically just and in simpler terms, right? I've had this kind of discussion with people who are like pantheists or New Agers and people who have just decided that the universe is God. Is that basically what they've done is they've just come up with a new word for universe.
Yes,
And what you've kind of done is it sounds like you have just you've taken this concept of the zero-dimensional quantum fluctuation and you've called it God. And I don't know that you've built a successful argument
But-
for the claim that without God nothing can exist because you have to address the question of God's existence.
how do you make the leap between your own awareness and an interaction with a physical existence that came out of a zero-dimensional quantum fluctuation?
Well,
That's getting into a lot of biology, cosmology, chemistry,
Doctor,
physics, stuff like that.
Is this your field, or do you have? I mean,
This
it's
is-
not really your field, but do you have any input?
This is not my field at all, I'm happy to say. I don't know if you've done graduate work in physics. I certainly have not, so it's not an area I feel comfortable addressing. But I think one of the problems is that once you import a word like God, or whatever the word is in other languages,
let's
people
say universal singular consciousness.
Okay, well, as long as you're not then importing all the old baggage of the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Quran and everything that's associated with the ancient Near East and the multiplicity of divinities that existed there and all of the ethnocentric connections with the ancient Hebrews. If it's just a cosmic consciousness.
Scientific perspective.
Yeah. I don't know how scientific it is to talk about a cosmic consciousness. The universe is a very puzzling place, and one of the things that's most puzzling about it, that again is another discovery of the last 50 or 60 or 80 years, is that it's a pretty large place. Now, I mentioned in the question and answer afterwards, there was a Scientific American article just a few months ago speculating, I thought rather emptily, on the possibility of an infinite number of universes, all out of course, contact with each other.
Wouldn't that, by definition, logically reverse what we call universe? Because universe, singular.
Well, but I mean...
Well, but there could be many Big Bangs that have taken place at 10 to the infinity miles from this universe. We only have evidence for one Big Bang.
The universe would be wouldn't it be then a probability distribution?
Well, I don't know. One of the points they tried to make was
because they would all exist simultaneously.
Well, there is another aspect of quantum mechanics called the many worlds hypothesis, which talks about that.
Exist simultaneously.
Yeah, which talks about that very thing. There are multiple universes that coexisting. In which there's a universe in which Martin Wagner did not just pick up his coffee cup.
Yes, I understand.
So, but it's and you've heard about the whole butterfly effect theory and all the rest of it. So again, this is wild. I do not claim to be. I wish we could get Mark Lowy back on the program. He is our resident quantum mechanics expert. And try to get him to address this topic. He's living in Dallas now, but again, I do not have expertise in quantum mechanics, so I cannot address the points that you're making with any expertise from a scientific standpoint. But what I can say is that just from a layman's perspective, it sounds to me like you are coming with you're trying to structure a much more sophisticated version of the God of the Gaps. You're looking at many of the things that are still quite inexplicable, or at least difficult to wrap your brain around when it comes to quantum physics, and you are deciding to call that God. And I'm not saying that that's an invalid thing to do.
I'm not calling that God. I'm just calling that God's realm.
Okay. Well, again, but it's wildly speculative, and like I said, I can't comment on the quantum mechanics aspects of it with any real scientific expertise. Well then,
how about this from a purely logical point of view? If the universe is a singular consciousness, then
see, that's a big if.
Yeah,
that's a big if.
From each other.
See, I don't know that I accept that premise of the universe as being a consciousness. I don't really know that I have evidence that the universe is anything other than a really big, interesting machine.
Okay.
I mean, for me to accept the universe as a consciousness, I would have to see some examples of directed conscious action.
Think about it like this. If our brain is made up of hundreds of billions of neurons, and it's not necessarily the neurons themselves that make up the consciousness, but rather the interaction between the neurons. What I'm saying is that within quantum theory, it is more the strings that make up consciousness as they interact with each other on an infinite level.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, just because you can draw a parallel between two dissimilar things doesn't mean...
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make an analogy here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, a parallel analogy, whatever. Just because there are neurons that work together and form consciousness doesn't mean that the molecules in the universe or whatever also can work together and form a consciousness. They may, but we have no evidence of that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of molecules and atoms in the ocean, but I'm not going to say that the ocean is alive. And the ocean has a consciousness.
No. I'm saying that evolution explains the entire universe. But because the universe is alive, it is at It is from the level of like the quantum chaos.
Right. Okay. Again,
that
see,
that we arise through the process of universal evolution.
Okay, I think I get it.
Where does life start?
Right. I think I kind of get the general gist of where you're at. Like I said, you ought to bounce this off some people in like a quantum mechanics, chat room or discussion board, and get some PhDs to wrestle with this. Like I said, I don't have the scientific expertise in quantum mechanics.
I'm a college student.
Okay.
At St. Edward's.
Okay. Well, that's great.
I'm a political science major.
Okay. Well, I'm sure there's talk to some physicists there and over a cup of coffee and brainstorm it.
Okay.
And get back to us and let us know how the conversation goes, okay? It's interesting, right? I don't know that I accept the assumption that you're working from that the universe is a living, conscious entity, but who's to say it couldn't be argued for, right? But it still, I think, is as wildly speculative as a lot of things in quantum mechanics. So
just like any definition of God, evidence of that would be kind of nice.
But we got a lot of other. We appreciate your call, but we got some other folks in line now. Okay. So talk to us anytime, all right? Take care. No. What can you add to that? All right. Well, who is Juan is, I believe, waiting for us. So, hi. Thanks for holding. You're on the air.
Hi. How are you guys?
We're all right. How you doing?
You guys are doing an excellent job. I have a question for the doctor. At the very beginning, he mentioned the name of a book, the author of the book, and can he please repeat it so I can buy that book?
Which book was it?
It might have been User Illusion. The User Illusion?
Consciousness. Something about consciousness.
Would it have been the User Illusion?
Well, the one book I recommend, I've said to the group, if you read one science book a year, this is it. It's called The User Illusion.
Exactly. That's the name?
Yes. It's Penguin paperback.
And the author is?
Author is Tor, T-O-R, Norretrandes, which is N-O-R-R-E, T-R-A-N-D-E-R-S.
Well, wait a second.
Yeah. And you know what? You can probably just do a search for the title.
Right.
Yeah.
Just punch in User Illusion.
The User Illusion.
User Illusion. It's really very good.
And it's Penguin.
Penguin paperback.
Okay. And all right. Question. And the other one is just a comment on three aspects of this God, and omnipotent and omnibenevolent and all that. Mm-hmm. One, it occurs to me that there's one extra aspect, entity, which would be that he's infinitely totally caring less about what happens in this corner of the universe here on Earth.
You're popping in and out on us. Is that your phone or?
Sounds like your battery's going down.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So I'm just gonna.
Okay.
I'm just going to have to hang up because I ran out of battery.
Okay, well, give us the question again really quickly, and we'll try to address it before your battery goes out.
That this particular God is just observing and could care less about what happens.
Okay, so it's like the God of deism, as it were.
Yeah, this particular God that any God that they present is a God that does not care about what happens to him.
Yeah. Well, that's...
they could care less because all the things that happen... Yeah. If he ever created it, he said, "Well, I made it. Now I would want no part of this."
Yeah. Well, that's certainly the I can certainly imagine any God with any sense or taste at all, looking down at the likes of Falwell and Robertson and Rush and saying, "I don't want any part of you." But yeah, what you're talking about is essentially exactly what deists believe. A creator God that then has gone off and is doing other stuff and has just left us to our own devices.
Other hobbies.
It's also true that the divinities, or singular or plural, of Epicurus in the Lucretian system are imagined as having their own fine life out at the far edges of the universe. Of course, the far edges of the universe are a lot farther away than they were when Lucretius was writing, since they were just up beyond the stars and the moon and the canopy of the sky, and now it's 10 to the 21st miles in every direction that we can look.
Right.
And it makes for a much larger universe. It makes it much harder to understand what it would mean to say consciousness, whether it's quantum theory, or which I don't understand, or any other, exists across these vast, totally empty spaces in which there aren't even enough molecules between us and some quasar at the edge of the universe to interrupt the stream of X-rays and visual light that come in. So that's a very empty space. And you can imagine that the divinities are at the far edge of the universe, and it it explains what happens about as well as saying there's something watching right over on us sitting up in the clouds. One of the things I came through in gathering up materials for my talk was an old Newsweek article from, a decade ago, which had a nice caption to a photograph. It was about 2 young girls in Belgium who had been abducted and mutilated and raped and killed. And the priest officiating at the funeral ceremony said, "Is the good Lord deaf?" And, of course, he doesn't dare answer his own question.
Yeah.
But if there's a divinity that cares, it has a very strange way of showing it.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you
Thank
for
you.
your call. Yeah. I got into a bit of a scrap again. I love doing this online. With a guy a Christian who tried to address the problem of evil by saying, okay, right, here's, all right, I admit that it would be logically inconsistent to say you have this omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent God, and bad stuff happens, and that's inconsistent, and it shouldn't be that way. But from the Christian point of view, there's a fourth consideration to take into place, and this completely makes the problem of evil not a problem anymore. And it says that God, and he said, God has a morally sufficient reason for allowing that to occur. So this is how you can have a God with all these attributes and still have bad stuff happen. He has a morally sufficient reason. And so I immediately said, well, what is it? Okay, give me the reason. Okay, because here's now what you have to do. If you're going to argue that position, you have to tell me what the morally sufficient reason is, that God would allow like little Dutch girls or little children to be raped and mutilated and hurt. And then you have to argue for why that reason is morally sufficient. Because what you're claiming is that there is such a thing as a moral justification for children being murdered. And if there is a moral justification for it, you've got to address that.
Well, it even goes farther than that. Even if you could make the argument that, let's say that we can go back in history and we could actually, kill Hitler's parents. Mm-hmm. Well, that's killing 2 people instead of, 50 million or however many Jews were killed, in the concentration camp stuff. So that you could say, well, that's decent. But the argument then becomes, well, this is God. He can't think of a better way to get the same outcome than having to kill somebody or maim somebody or having a hurricane or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be a better way than to kill somebody.
It's the old he's trying to teach us a lesson argument.
Yeah. Again, there's no better way that he can teach us this than by killing somebody.
Well, and my argument there is, okay, let's look at 9/11. All right, if God allowed that to happen in order to teach us a lesson, let's see what was the lesson learned. Okay, let's first talk about the people in the planes. Okay, they didn't learn a lesson because they died. Okay, the terrorists, they didn't learn a lesson because they died too, and they died believing that what they were doing was divine and just and what have you. Yeah. And all of us on the ground who survived, what lesson did we learn? That terrorism was bad? Excuse me, I think we already had that idea in place. That it's not a good thing to do mass murder. I don't think that was a lesson it's not like anyone was walking around the streets of New York City going, I just can't seem to figure out whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to kill thousands of people in a single blow with bombs and crashing planes and, oh, well, how convenient. Well, now I see it is. Thank you so much. It's not like anyone had that experience from 9/11. So this whole, it's to teach us things. It's just it's so specious, and it shows how, believers want to bend over backwards to, they want a God who is a moral authority, but who has no moral responsibility. That I think is what they want.
There's an old theological line of argument, which Michael Martin's book, which I've commended several times now, deals with at great length, along with the whole scholarship on evil and omnipotence in that line of argument, which is that the justification for having evil is so that we can have free will, so that we can be responsible for choices and made to pay for making inappropriate choices. But Martin has a long chapter that's even better, it's more technical, but it's better than Mackey's short article, that deals with all of this and resolves the problems by showing that you can't consistently use the moral vocabulary that people insist on using about goodness and rightness and so on, and yet turn around and have things that by any rational standard of the application of moral vocabulary are monstrous and atrocious, like the Holocaust or any number of other things you can come up with that people do.
Right.
So you get caught in a trap trying to say, well, this is an evil at this level, but there's a higher order good, a second level good, to which it suddenly is absorbed and becomes acceptable. But then there's a problem, and you can end up with infinitely receding levels of higher goods that you try to use to solve this problem. But I think anyone who digs up Martin's chapter in that remarkable book You'll see that you cannot make this and still be consistent in the vocabulary that people want to use. They want to say, things are good, God is good, Jesus is good, whatever. And there are not evils happening that are irredeemable, irreducible evils that are the responsibility of divinity, the responsibility of someone, something, somewhere else. And you can't have it both ways. They're trying to have it cake and eat it too. So that's where the problem really resides.
Yeah. I agree. Okay, I'm sorry, we lost caller 2. Please call back who you were. We were seconds away from taking you, and so don't give up on us because we will get around to you. Hey, you're on the air. Hello?
Hey.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure it was me.
yeah, hey, yeah, we got you. So, hey.
No, it's good you guys are putting up this debate. It's good to talk about this stuff. My question was, religion. Would you classify what you guys are doing as a sort of a religion?
Well, no, because I think if you know the dictionaries, the definitions that I've seen or anything to go by, I mean the term religion refers to there's like an organized practice of worship, and it tends to have a supernatural element where you either have a deity or a spiritual leader that is revered. And atheists don't really do that as a general rule. I mean, a person can be a theist, right? A person can believe in God and not be religious. Believing in God is not necessarily a religious thing. I mean, a person can go through their life, believe that there's a God, but they never pray to it. They never go to a church service. They never do any sort of obeisance to this God. Religion is pretty much a specific practice, and atheism I would describe more as a philosophical point of view. We don't believe in any gods. And we think that, and we tend to be skeptics towards more or less most, if not all, supernatural claims. I'm skeptical towards all supernatural claims, but it's pretty much up to atheists value individual thinking in your own terms, more or less.
So
and debating like we're doing on the show. So
yeah, let me ask you this then. Just like what you said right now about religion. Basically, according to you and atheists in general oppose people getting together as a group or whatever, like a pack, just worshiping one god or maybe whatever, like a bunch of different gods. But in essence, what you guys are doing is getting people together as atheists. I don't believe in God myself, but just don't you think the practice of organizing is at the end of the day defeating the purpose of not having religion and not having problems because of religion? Because religion is just a term for organizing, and as you said,
well, not necessarily.
They throw in the supernatural element to make it seem prettier. But
think about. Hang on, it's not just people organizing and getting together that makes a religion, right? I mean, if that were true, then Britney Spears fan club would be a religion, and it's not. So it's religion.
That's because Britney Spears is whatever.
I mean, religion. I think that in fact there has been a legal definition of religion that has been reached. That is, that it involves a supernatural belief, and B, an organized worship. So just organizing. People organize for all kinds of reasons. And there are. The ACA, in fact, originated just as a social group. It's a bunch of people who got together over coffee and bagels. Who just wanted to meet other atheists. So I think the reason that, and it's true that you have not historically seen atheists organizing the way like our group has, and you have other groups like the Center for Inquiry and American Atheists and what have you. Specifically because, as a general rule, atheists really aren't joiners of groups. We tend to be like lone wolves and nonconformists.
Here, let me put a small scenario right in front of you.
But hang on, let me just finish really quickly. So the only reason that groups like ours have sort of originated is because the very politically powerful and well-financed religious organizations, are out there trying to make serious political inroads in ways that could affect folks like ourselves and legally. There are people out there who are very strong, like in the Christian right, who are trying to wield influence in the political, in the corridors of power, as it were. and in ways that aren't really fair to anyone who isn't part of their camp. And so as a result, atheists have seen the need to kind of organize to sort of say, hey, wait, we've got rights too, and what have you. So, but our show is here to, we're here to, outreach to other unbelievers, and we're here to just let folks know that it's okay to be an unbeliever, and then we're here to take calls from believers and let them challenge us and debate us.
Okay. As I was saying, let me put this real quick scenario in front of you, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what your name is. What is your first name?
I'm Martin, that's Ashley, and this is Dr. D.
Imagine this, Martin.
Okay.
Your program, right, it takes off. Because of the way things are going with religion right now, the priests and the kids and all that stuff, that whole system crumbles a few, let's say 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. And you, Martin, are in the forefront of the atheist movement because of this show. Just imagine it picks up, gets huge, it's worldwide now. Now, if you think about this, wouldn't you then be considered a deity or a demagogue, and then you be not exactly worshipped, but followed by your atheist followers?
Well,
what you're in turn doing, I mean, this is real hypothetical.
No, I think
my point, right?
Be
the founder of a religion.
Well, I don't think that other atheists would see it that way. Some Christians might attack us and try to accuse us of that. You know what? What we do have in our culture, there is this sort of secular religion, as you put it, where we do have the this cult of celebrity. People all just can't seem to get enough of who Jennifer Lopez is dating this week or whatever. So people do tend to. Oh, I don't know. I mean, if the social tide were ever to turn to where outspoken atheists were like the top celebrities in our culture, that would certainly be a weird world. But again, I wouldn't mind a nice big house in Beverly Hills, and all my, So, but hey, we're gonna get on to the next caller, and we appreciate your questions. Okay, take care.
Okay.
I was going to say, while we're waiting for another caller to come up, that one of the essential elements in most religious practice is the attempt through ritual, through actions, through sacrifice, to affect the outcome of future events by influencing, placating, or whatever forces that are supposed to be out there. There's a famous episode that occurred somewhere in the Scandinavian countries 100 years ago when anthropologists allegedly went out and asked people, do you believe in God? And they said, we don't believe, we fear. Because if you're living in an agricultural, pastoral life, your life and your economy can be ruined in a single stroke, and you fear whatever the unknown is that could do this to you. So that's an element I think you wouldn't find in non-believing groups, is the attempt to influence that kind of event. The religions are always telling you, we can make things happen that are good. If you see that clip that runs on TV locally for one of the, I think, Baptist churches, they say, and the woman says, if you do good, if you obey God, good will happen. I really enjoy that remark because it's so obviously untrue.
Right, because there's this little thing in New York City a couple of years back.
But just in general, the whole idea that there's a direct connection between what you do being subservient. People are assumed to want to be slaves to the divinities. This is, by the way, a very ancient conception. If you look at Babylonian literature from 4,000 years ago, it says explicitly that the gods created humans to build their temples and carry out their religious services as slaves to them, using words for slavery, which get glossed over when we talk about being in the service of a divinity. And religious services, that's the word servus and servitium out of Latin, meaning servitude, slavery.
Right.
We talk about servants of God rather than slaves. It's a very touchy question.
Odd that God has nothing better to do with his time than make these tiny little creatures that are practically insignificant to him, just to worship him and make towers that are absolutely microscopic and nothing to him.
Well, of course, the whole notion, of God needing to be worshipped, tends to run against it tends to stand in stark contradiction to the idea that God is this perfect being. Because if you are perfect, you lack for nothing. That's the definition of perfect. If you need to be worshipped, then what you have is there is a need that is not being fulfilled unless worship is taking place to fulfill it. So if God wants you to worship him, he cannot be perfect. And
there is, by the way, an old line, and I didn't have a chance to quote it in the talk today, but it goes back to Euripides' Heracles. I won't give it to you in Greek, but it says exactly what you've just said. And it's put in the mouth of Heracles, so it's fully ironic. Heracles is supposed to be, mythologically, the son of Zeus, by an illicit relationship with a woman that Zeus happened to desire, because that was the nature of Zeus, to look at eligible women on Earth and pursue them. But Heracles, in the course of a tirade against conventional Greek mythology, says, thy God, if there really is one, is in need of nothing. The word for nothing is held over to the second line, oudenos, at the beginning of a trimeter, for maximum effect. That God doesn't need anything. If there really is one, it's perfect, as you say, and has no needs. So in effect, it doesn't need the Parthenon. It doesn't need the temples to all the divinities in Athens. It was a very striking statement. It shows why Euripides was so controversial in his lifetime. And it's not a view that's new at all. It's a view that does exist in the past, and it's a view that's very hard to explain. There are two problems in divine theology, and one is the wishes, the will, the wants, the needs of the divinity. And the other is not explained by people who promote intelligent design, which is how does a non-material divinity make an atom move? How does a divinity that has no physical existence, according to all the standard definitions, make anything, levitate a coffee cup, or do anything else? It's always said, well, God has power. Our God is an awesome God, is what the bumper sticker says. But I don't see how a divinity, I've never heard any explanation, and people who promote intelligent design have never, as far as I know, tried to answer how a divinity would get its little hand in there and mess around with the molecules that lead to evolutionary development of the DNA of eukaryotic creatures of life. So it seems to me that these are enormous gaps, and people just take for granted because it's not challenged. That's why programs like this are essential, to ask people to think about this.
Too true. Okay, John has been waiting patiently on line 3. Hi, how you doing?
How you doing?
Fine. So what's your question?
I just have. I am a Bible college student. And, I'm doing a report on atheists.
Okay.
And can you tell me what per se that y'all believe? I know you believe there's no God. That's the simplest form of atheism. But can you tell me what else y'all believe with that?
Okay. Well, first off, that there's really no. I mean, the only thing that you can say in common from one atheist to another, or atheist in a group, is that we all agree that we don't believe in any gods. Above and beyond that, atheists, generally speaking, atheists can have any number of, personal, you can have liberal atheists, conservative atheists, you can have atheists who are objectivists, you can have atheists who, follow one philosophy or another. I think, though, that many atheists, it can probably safely be said, prefer to answer questions pertaining to the world around them from more or less a standpoint of scientific examination. Like look at what the available evidence is, weigh it carefully. Always challenge assumptions. Don't necessarily take what authority figures, even if that person is a respected scientist. Don't automatically take what they say to be true. Always have very high and rigorous standards of evidence that you apply even to the most basic questions of life. I think that but that's not really a belief, right? That's a method. That's like the process. That's the way of thinking that a lot of atheists like to employ when just looking at questions.
As most Christians, I hear some Christians that call y'all show, and they really try to bash y'all and come after you and say you're totally wrong. I'm not going to do that, and because as a right as a human, you have a choice to choose whatever you want to believe. And I just have a question. If you believe that there is no God, what controls your life?
Well, first, I never said that I believe there's no God. There could very well be a God. I just don't believe in one right now because I don't see evidence for one. What controls my life? I'm not necessarily. Well, I certainly, as a self-aware, and we'll let the other, and of course Ashley and Dr. D will answer this too. There's certainly, forces beyond my control that, everything from the weather to, if there were a reckless driver that happened to run me down. There's no one real source that has absolute control. I certainly, as a self-aware thinking being, want to control as much of it as I can as possible. I take care of my health. I try to, I'm kind to my friends, and I try to benefit my community, and I don't do things that are harmful either to myself or others, and so I think the only thing an individual can do is try to exercise as much control over one's own fate as they can, because otherwise there really isn't any alternative to that. I mean, Dr. D, what do you have to?
I would suggest to the caller, although if you're at a Bible college, it may not be in the library, but there's a very good introductory volume on how values can be addressed and created without relying on a supernatural source. And that's a series of lectures that the late Oxford philosopher Richard Robinson published back 40 years ago called An Atheist's Values. It's been reprinted several times. It's now available on the net, apparently, in a complete version at positiveatheism.org. And he quotes someone from back in the 50s saying, if you don't believe in a divinity, you can't possibly have morals. I should expect you to be having a high old time. And he makes the case that you can create a much better system, a much more reliable and sanely based system of values on your own as humans, rather than relying on claims of divinely inspired revelations, which of course can't be verified, and I think I don't see how physically they can even have happened. But it's a very difficult thing if you've been raised. I was raised in a sort of lukewarm Christian environment myself, and it's a very difficult thing to talk yourself out of it. I'm very reluctant even now to use the word atheist because there's that little twinge. Oh my God, you didn't say that, did you? It's just that terrible word.
I know, there's still associations that we're trying to outgrow.
But the middle section of Richard Robinson's Atheist's Values is a very good, very accessible, very intelligent discussion of how people should live their lives in the face of what he regards as permanent eternal death, and how they should not be governed by the superstitions of the past. And one undergraduate, he says, came up to him at Oxford, probably in the 50s or early 60s, and asked him, do you really believe what you're saying? It was so unorthodox and so shocking to the conventionally raised young man who would show up at Oxford in the first place, a well-bred sort from a comfortable family. And he was saying things so different and so unconventional that they couldn't process it. But if you can find a copy of that or just find it on the net, it would be a very serious challenge, and it'll show you what atheists believe and how they deal with the serious problems of life that we all have to face sooner or later. I'm facing them as I get older every day. It's really become a grim battle.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get on to our next caller. So we appreciate your call, all right? Take care. Okay. Riley is on line 2. We're down to like the last 3 minutes. Just want to throw in tv@atheist-community.org. is our viewer email address. If you don't get through to us online, you can send us viewer feedback, and if we get good letters, we try to bring them on the air and read them out and answer them. And of course, we answer all the emails that we get generally. So, hi, you're on the air.
Death to humans.
Oh, whatever. Hi, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hello? Yes.
This is Alexandria.
Yes?
And I had a question on a previous show. I had seen and heard you say that your mother did not know that you were, in fact, an atheist.
Well, I've never used the A word around her, but I think that both my parents suspect that I don't accept their religious beliefs anymore.
But, I mean, something you're so adamant about, you would expect your family you would try to convince them and...
Well, I mean, unlike, religion, it's not...
F-U.
Yeah, so it's not, atheists aren't out there to convert people.
No.
But I'll tell you why I don't bring the subject up to my mother, and that is because, due to her religious indoctrination, she believes in the doctrine of hell, which I think is one of the most pernicious Christian doctrines that exists. And, this whole idea that her son might go to hell is this thing that, causes a lot of upset. To her. I mean, really, she really gets bent out of shape about it. And so this is just one more reason to resent these irrational superstitions, because they have introduced into her life this aspect of this thing that unnecessarily and needlessly upsets her over something that's not going to happen and not going to be a problem.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins in Free Inquirer a few months ago put out a call to all atheists to come out of the closet, about the only group that's left in there, I think, after all the revelations of the last few decades since the 60s. And he does have a point that people are reluctant to state publicly, especially when you have an administration in Washington with prayer meetings and people as sanctimonious as they can possibly be.
Yeah.
This is not the right time to do it, but of course that's what makes it, in fact, the right time to do it. I think Dawkins, I don't think he's right to adopt this term of brights for people who are atheists. That strikes me as
I'm not a big fan
very
of
bad PR.
Yeah.
But to say that it's time for people to make these statements, that's why I wrote the article for Free Inquirer, and I'm trying to drum up some kind of conference
Right.
on the subject.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for that article, and we really appreciate you coming on the show,
Okay,
Dr. D.
very
Thank
good.
you very
Pleased to
much.
be here.
Excellent presentation. And again, visit our website, atheist-community.org, for more information about the group. We're here every Sunday, 4:30 p.m. We'll see you next time. And TV at atheist-community.org is viewer feedback email. Ashley, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We're done. We'll see you next week. All right, theists, we don't hate you. We just think you're wrong. Bye-bye. Take care.